I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I do also want to say that this is a very kind of relaxed presentation and workshop. I want you to be your most authentic self, your best self here. And, just kind of relax and ideally just take everything in. So what we're going to talk about today is going to be a little bit about silencing your inner critic. And I'm just going to give you guys a really quick rundown about myself because I don't really like bragging on myself. So, but my name is Tesha Crockett-Gibson. I am a performance coach, which for people that may not know what that is, I also took a coaching certification for HR, and I help individuals who either may be having performance problems in work or are like going to a new position in work. I coach them. I'm also a wellness coach, and I am the owner of Wellness After Dark. I have been working in wellness for over 20 years, and my specializations really are in health promotion, positive psychology, and behavior change. And then the last thing that I've put on the slide is that I am a doctoral candidate. So, a lot of my, background comes from like the educational side, even though I am very much into wellness, but I am actually getting my doctorate in public health. So I'm super excited about that as well. But that's really what kind of encouraged me to start focusing on this inner critic, because over the last 3 or 4 years of being in this doctoral program, I've experienced my own kind of like imposter syndrome, or should I be here, or what am I doing, and all of those things. So again, I wanted to welcome you guys. Anytime you guys have questions, please feel free to just come off mute or ask a question. I will also pause, and there'll be lots of time in here for just kind of interaction. So I do like to start all of my presentations or workshops with just kind of settling in and taking a deep breath. So if you have the opportunity, you can definitely close your eyes. You can turn off your camera if you want. But I really want us to kind of be present. I know a lot of us probably just got off, 10 Zoom calls in the morning, or presentations, or kids running around, or whatever the case may be. So I really just kind of want us to kind of settle in and just kind of start taking a couple of deep breaths here. Just really focusing on your breathing. So breathing in through your nose and just exhaling through your mouth. And I'm not really asking you guys to change anything about the way that you're breathing. I just want you to become aware of how you're breathing right now. So again, just in through your nose and out through your mouth. And really just allowing yourself to kind of settle in here. And then just noticing anything about how you feel today. So anything that's tight in your body, anything that's extra loose. Maybe you're carrying a little tension in your shoulders or your back. Maybe there's a little nervousness in your stomach. Whatever the case is, I just want us to kind of become aware of that, not changing any of the things that are going on. And we're just going to take a couple more seconds here, really just to focus on our breathing. And then just kind of settle into this hour that we're giving ourselves to learn a little bit more about our inner critic. And whenever you're ready, you guys can come back. You guys can take yourself off of the camera, bring your camera back on, or if you feel more comfortable leaving it off, it's fine. So I do like to start with a little bit of a deep breath. I also want to tell you guys that we're going to laugh today. We're going to laugh at ourselves a little bit, or you guys are going to laugh at me. So whichever may be the case. But we're going to try to have some fun in taking a look at this inner critic and just kind of going through this wellness journey. So really quick, a basic agenda. We're going to talk about what our inner critic is, why it's here. We're going to talk about some strategies of how to silence it. And then we're going to talk about what strategies you guys can utilize to take away, right? So the goal really is to have you guys be able to take away at least one thing from today that you guys can do to help with your inner critic. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what the heck is your inner critic, right? We hear a lot of people talk about it, but what really is it? So I'm going to give you guys some psychological definitions first, and then we're going to talk about what it is and then how it affects us. So the first one is a cruel inner critic is the person in the person who hostilely monitoring and directing the person to fail. So that sounds super strong, super rude, right? The next definition is the inner critic refers to an inner voice that judges, criticizes, and demeans us, whether the criticism is objectively justified or not. So now it's just criticizing it regardless if there's a true statement to it or not. And then the last one is the inner critic or critical inner voice is a concept used in popular psychology or psychotherapy to refer to subpersonality that judges and demeans us as a person. So when thinking about these definitions, this sounds like a terrible individual that we have within us, right? So why do we even have them? So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. It's like, why is it even here? So when we think about our inner critic, why do we have it? It's designed to protect us, right? So it's designed to monitor us and help us in certain aspects, right? So like it prevents you from saying the wrong thing when you're in a group setting, or it points out areas of improvement. So like your inner critic can be helpful for you. So like if you're a person that's chronically late, like I tend to be a lot of times, it points out that I need areas of improvement of leaving the house earlier, or I just need areas of improvement of waking up earlier, or just kind of showing up when I need to show up, right? So we have it for a reason. It's a self-monitoring for us. However, where does it come from? Let's be clear. It comes from childhood. Everything comes from childhood, right? Like we've established that everything comes from our parents, but not necessarily just our parents. It also comes from anybody that you might have interacted with as a child, anybody that has a culture idea about who you were as a child. But we weren't born with this inner critic. We weren't born with something that says you're not good enough. There were experiences in life that happened when we were younger that now we've just carried with us our entire life, right? So when I use this example, I know everybody's like the parent, but like when I use this example, I was a collegiate athlete, which means I played softball probably from the time I was 5, right? But there are still times that I hear my softball coach from like when I was 12 years old. So there's still times that I hear this pitching coach and I still hear like some of the criticism that he gave me, were probably beneficial at the time as a pitcher, but I still hear the words that he says. I still hear the words that my parents said. So while those topics that they might have brought up to us when we were kids might have been beneficial, like the question is, are they really serving us now? Right. Another example that I use is that, boys should never cry or show emotion. Right. So now we have this whole generation of men that don't cry or don't show emotion because that's what they were told when they were like 5 or 6 years old. Right. So really being able to like break those thoughts that we were told when we were a kid. And then lastly, can the inner critic be helpful to us? There is a way for us to be friends with the inner critic. There's also a way for us to silence it or kind of work with it. But really the big thing is to keep it from going rogue, because that's really where it becomes a problem, right? Your inner critic starts going rogue and it starts telling you what you can't do, when you can't do it, how you can't do it. And then it just becomes a domino effect, right? And the next thing you know, you're like, I have no idea why I haven't done this, right? So you can utilize your inner critic and be successful. And we can use it to be helpful, but we really want to prevent it from like just going rogue on us. All right, so before we jump into breakout rooms, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about like your inner critic and what they're saying. So the first thing for me is really acknowledging my inner critic, like acknowledging that it's there. What's it saying? What are the emotions that are rising? What actions are coming from the emotions? And then what's it keeping me from? So these are some of mine, but these are also some of the other coaches that I've worked with and talked to. But, maybe your inner critic is saying you're too old or you're too young, or you're not good enough to be a coach, or you're not perfect enough to be a coach. Also, like you don't have what it takes, right? So that's something that always kind of pops up for me, and I know a lot of other people. And then this is one that I feel everybody has, but it's always the should. Like, what should I be doing? Who should I be? This is what I should be doing today to make me a better person. But What if I'm just enough being who I am? And then once my inner critic starts giving me this criticism, what emotions arise for me? So for some of us, we become fearful. Completely unmotivated. So what I want us to think about today is, like, when we're thinking about our inner critic, when it shows up, like, what emotions arise with that? The next thing that I like to do when I'm identifying my inner critic is, what actions do these feelings lead to? So my inner critic is saying, hey, you're not good enough. So that makes me feel depressed or stressed. But then what actions come from me feeling depressed or stressed? The first one, avoidance, right? And that could be the fact that, like, I'm supposed to be working on my website. I'm supposed to be looking for new clients. I'm supposed to be networking. But instead, I'm going to go online. I'm going to do shoe shopping, right? Because my inner critic says I'm not good enough to do this anyway, so I might as well just do something that brings me joy. So I'm just going to do some shoe shopping or go on Amazon, right? So really that avoidance. The next thing is the shame and the judgment that comes along with that. So now I start judging myself, and now I'm starting to say, I'm not good enough. I don't have what it takes. So now once I start saying that, now I'm disagreeing with my inner critic, and now I am stopping myself from doing the things that I really want to do. The other thing is procrastination. I am a doctoral student, so I am great at procrastination. Let me just tell you guys, I've been great at procrastination my whole life, but like now it's so evident. It jumps out at me every single day, but it's so evident for me. So another way that I feel like it jumps out is like procrastination, like, oh, I'll do this in 3 months. I'll do this in 6 months. I'll do this tomorrow, whatever the case is, but like really kind of just procrastinating on those items. And then the last action that I hear a lot is just giving up, right? Like, I'm not good enough anyway, so why would I even put forth the money, the time, or the effort? The last thing I think about when we start talking about identifying and understanding our inner critic is, what is it keeping me from? So what are the goals that it's really keeping you from at this point? Is it starting your own business? Is it becoming ICF certified? Is it leaving a bad situation? Maybe it's leaving a job that you really just don't like or just doesn't give you like joy anymore. Is it stopping you from finding your true passion? Or even exploring just new limits and possibilities of who and what you could be? So I think one of the things that I want us to do, and we're going to go into breakout rooms. I know Ashley told me to tell her when. So we're going to kind of try to jump into breakout rooms. I'd like to do like 2 to 3 people if we could, just so they can have the opportunity to talk. But we're going to go to breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. And I want you guys just to have a conversation about kind of what your inner critic is saying, what emotions are rising for you, and then what are the actions that come from these emotions? And then what is it keeping you from? So what's the overall goal that really this inner critic is keeping you from right now? All right.
Amazing. How long would you like to do the breakout room for?
Let's do 6 minutes. We can give them 6 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
We're going to go ahead and jump to our next slide. So the one thing with the inner critic, and the thing that I realized, is that there are just so many problems with it, right? So, we talk about it being so negative to you, it causing negative emotions, it causing you not to do the things that you really want to do. But the other parts is that, guess what? You're the only person that can hear them, right? So regardless of how many friends you nobody else hears them. So they're taller to that coach or like that parent or whatever. Like, they may have been yelling at the whole entire team, but your inner critic is only talking to you. Nobody else can hear them. Nobody else knows what's going on. It's just you. So you're observing everything that they're saying at that particular time. The other thing that is a problem is that they never really go away. So again, you can make friends with your inner critic, You can silence them, you can combat them, but they never really go away. They're going to be with us for the rest of our lives. So it's really about acceptance at that point, right? Like accepting them, understanding what they're trying to get us to do, and then finding productive ways to like listen to them. So the next thing is producing feelings of shame and deficiency, low self-esteem and depression. So those feelings that we were talking about earlier, again, when you're listening to your inner critic and you're the only person listening to them and you're not really identifying them, those thoughts can kind of spiral, right? So you start thinking you're not good enough. And then you start thinking like, why was I even trying this? Now I'm not good enough for anything. And they can definitely spiral, or just become like that domino effect, sorry. And then the last two is that they keep you stuck wherever you are, right? So again, you can use them as a motivating factor, but the truth of the matter is if we don't use them as a motivating factor, then we start avoiding, we start procrastinating, we start not doing anything. I think Anna said like she kind of shutting off relationships or like kind of withdrawing. So you kind of just get stuck in the place that you're at and you're never growing. And then the other thing is a lot of times this inner critic may just be a liar, right? It may not be something that's true. And we're going to talk about that as well. But a lot of times your inner critic is telling you you're not good enough. That's 100% not true. You're always good enough. You're always here. You're always showing up. And maybe you don't show up 100% every single day, but you're showing up the best that you can that particular day. So in a lot of instances, I feel like that inner critic can be a liar. All right, so we're going to talk about how to silence your inner critic, or some of the things that I've done to silence my inner critic. You guys are welcome to take some. I think that I'm going to take the naming, because I don't think I've named my inner critic. But one of the things that I do is I have decided to give my inner critic some legs, maybe even a little personality. I talk about getting a little bit of distance and what that looks like, and getting distance from those thoughts and really understanding like what's causing those thoughts. Are these thoughts true? The third thing we're going to talk about is going to be self-compassion. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is really becoming your own biggest fan, right? We're always fans for the people that we're coaching. We're fans for people that we're in relationships with. We're fans for our friends, our family, but really becoming your own biggest fan when that inner critic kind of rears its ugly head. All right, so the first one is let's give them some legs and maybe personality. So this is my inner critic, right? So when I think of my inner critic, it's this old lady, very eclectic, very outspoken. I don't know why she has a cigar in her mouth, but I think it's because she has like a raspy voice when she's yelling at me. But that's who I feel is my inner critic, right? I am everything that she is not, but she's also that person that just tells me everything that's wrong with me. Right. So whether it's my pitching coach coming back to me and like yelling at me about something, or my parents, or something that I just learned when I was younger, this is where it's coming from. So when I started identifying her, and I think I'm going to give her a name. I just don't know what name I'm going to give her yet, but I think I'm going to give her a name. But the first thing I did is like, what does she look like? And I know this is very silly and it's humorous, but reality for me is that like, once I did this and I gave her a name, I could identify who she was and I knew when she was showing up. So what does she look like? What does she sound like? And then the other one that was really big for me is, who is she to you? Right now, it's not going to just be one person, but it may be a combination of people, right? So I know I mentioned my softball coach or my pitching coach, but it's also probably my mom, right? Like, so every teenage girl had that time when she walked down the stairs, her mom was like, why are you wearing that? Don't wear that. Or whatever the case may be. But like my mom, a lot of times plays that role for me. My softball coach, sometimes my teachers play that role for me, especially when I was like in elementary school and I went to like an all-girl Catholic school and the nuns would say certain things. So I feel like that's also them coming back to me. But I feel like it's a lot of different people that kind of play a role in this, in who my person is. Now your person's going to be completely different, but like this is who my person is. But I think if you give them a little bit of legs, sometimes it helps us identify them and then understand when they're showing up. The next thing that I try to do is really try to get some distance, right? So when I'm listening to the thoughts that come up for my inner critic, the first thing I ask myself is, what is true about what my inner critic is telling me? Is my inner critic telling me like, you got to stop being late. You got to start getting up earlier. You got to be out the door 5 minutes earlier. You don't need to be on Instagram for this amount of time, or whatever the case is. You need to be where you said you were going to be at this particular time. Or is my inner critic just telling me that I'm not good enough to do something? The other thing, when I'm thinking about like these thoughts that come up or what I hear, is how long has this thought been with me? Right? Is this something that's been with me my whole entire life? Is this a habit? Like, is this something that I constantly do or I constantly think about? Or is this a new thought that's presenting itself? The next thing is really stop and listen. And I know we talk a lot to our clients about mindful awareness, but I really like to focus on what's going on around me, right? Like, what situation am I in? Who am I around? Am I stressed about a presentation at work? Am I stressed about something that's going on at home? Am I in traffic? Like, what's going on around me that's causing this to come up right now? So what are those triggers? The other thing with stop and listen is really stop trying to fight it, right? So maybe just being able to accept the fact that this is a thought that we're having. I'm going to acknowledge it, and then I'm going to let it go. So this thought comes into my mind. I'm going to figure out if it's a true thought, if it's here to help or hinder me. And then I'm going to find a way to let it go. It's here. I'm aware that it's here. I'm accepting it. And then I'm letting it go. And then again, what feelings are associated with it? What feelings are coming up when these things are happening? The last thing that I try to do when I'm trying to get some distance is really focus on my goals. So regardless of what your goal is at that particular time, being as specific as possible, especially if you see that your inner critic is showing up a lot more in a specific time or place, right? So being specific about those goals. So one of the goals that I talk about right now is like running. So probably 5 years ago, I was a huge runner. I was running all the time. And then I suffered a great deal of injuries. So ankle injuries, knee injuries, hip injuries, COVID, all kinds of other stuff, right? So every single time I think about like running a half marathon or a marathon, I'm like, I can barely run 2 miles. Let's be clear. Like my hip hurts, my back hurts, things of that sort. But over the time, I've started doing activities that have started helping me kind of rebuild my body. So like really putting those activities into place so that they can combat those thoughts. Because the thought that I have every single time somebody asks me to run a race is that my body's never gonna let me run a race again. And that may or may not be true. But the reality is like, once you start going to PT and you're doing yoga and you're lifting weights and you're trying to run like 2 miles this week and then maybe 3 miles the next week and then so on and so forth, I'm putting activities into place to combat those thoughts that constantly tell me that I'm never gonna be able to do this again. The next thing I talk about is self-compassion. And I know we talk about this a lot, but really having self-compassion for yourself. So I constantly have to remind myself that I'm only human. I am a super perfectionist. I want everything to be perfect all the time. And when it's not, I get down on myself super, super fast. And that's something, again, that I've had since I was probably super young. But I had to constantly remind myself that I'm only human. I am here and I'm showing up the best I can every single day. The other thing is reframing those thoughts. So even if there is something that's true about the thoughts that I'm having, I can always turn it around. So if I'm thinking that I don't have enough experience, or I'm thinking that I don't have enough time, or I'm thinking that I'm too old or too young, I always have the ability to turn those around, right? So regardless if there's any type of truth in what my critic is telling me, I can always figure out a path and a way to combat that. The other thing that I like is a self-compassion letter. So we talk a lot about self-compassion. We give ourselves grace. I like to write things down. The self-compassion letter for me is really writing a letter to myself that my best friend would write to me, or a letter that my brother or like my husband or somebody would write to me that cares about me, loves me, and understands that I'm only human. I like to write it down because I feel like if I write it down and I write a letter to myself, I can go back and look at that letter anytime that I'm having like doubts or anytime I'm having questions. It also, again, lets me see on paper that not only am I loved, but I'm loved by myself, and that I know that I got this. And then again, for me, it's really understanding that life and this acceptance is just a practice and it's not perfection. Now, it all may be different for you guys, but these are just some of the tools that I utilize and some of the things that have helped me. And then the last one is really become your own biggest fan. So the first one for me is bring your own sunshine to the table. I am a very energetic person. I am I guess an extroverted introvert. I don't know, whatever they call that person. I do feel like I'm an introvert, but people are like, you're not really an introvert because you like walk in the room and like you just literally light up everybody else's life and tell them how great they are. But sometimes I have to bring my own sunshine to the table, right? I walk in the door and I'm like, hey, sunshine, how are you? How's life? How's things going? But sometimes I have to bring my own sunshine. Sometimes I have to remind myself that I can create that for myself. Celebrating yourself like you would your best friend. I am the biggest cheerleader for people that I care about, people that I coach, people that are in my life, friends, coworkers. I'm the biggest cheerleader for them. So sometimes I have to be a big cheerleader for myself as well. And then the last thing that I do is really reminding myself every day one thing that I know that makes me feel confident, smart, and amazing. Because I know that I'm confident, I'm smart, I'm amazing, I'm a great person, but like reminding myself of those things at least one a day, I think also helps combat that. So I'm going to pause for questions. We're going to go into another breakout room in just a second, but I'm going to pause just to see if anybody has any comments, questions, or anything they'd like to share at this point. So I don't know if there's a way to separate them like 100%. I do think going back and identifying the inner critic versus that person that was abusive to you at one point in time is important. And I think where that comes into play is maybe naming the inner critic or creating an identity for the inner critic. Like I know I joke about like creating an inner, like that old lady, but creating an identity for them. And then seeing what's in common. Like I would say like what's another thing that I talk about is like what's the common denominator when we think about this parent or we think about this person that abused us, as well as like what we think about our inner critic saying. So is there a link between that? Because that could also be, do you know what I mean? Like that could also be feeding our inner critic, if that makes sense. So I think it's identifying what their inner critic looks like and what their inner critic wants them to accomplish, and then separating that from what they hear or they see with that parent or that person that was critical or abusive to them. Does that help a little bit?
Yes. Thank you.
That's a difficult situation though, so thanks for sharing it. Anyone else before we jump into breakout rooms? So for your breakout rooms this time, I just want you guys to answer the last two questions. So we talked a little bit about like what the inner critic is saying, and like what emotions it brings up. But when you guys jump into breakout rooms this time, I'm gonna give you guys about 3 minutes, but I want to talk about like what percentage of what the inner critic is saying is true, right? And then what percentage of that is coming from that other person. And then the last question I want you guys to answer is what are the ideal actions you would like to take in this situation? So like once you hear your inner critic, you know the responses that you have. What are the ideal actions that you would want to take? Okay, Ashley, so let's do, it's about 2:47 or 2:47 my time. So let's do 3 minutes and then we'll come right back. So does anybody want to share like what percentage, like we talked about this a little bit in our group, but like what percentage of their inner critic, what their inner critic says is true? Or what ideal actions they would like to take in their situation? Or you can just put it in the chat. I'm fine with that too. I will say for me, like in my group, I was talking about what percentage of what my inner critic says is true? I would say it depends on what the inner critic's saying, but I would say probably 95% of it is untrue. And probably only 5% of it's true. We also talked about this a little bit in our group for the little time we had, but we talked about it being like more than one person that's your inner critic or contributes to that, right? So, you know, parents, coaches, aunts, uncles, people that kind of influence you when you were a kid. But like a lot of times mine's just telling me that I'm not doing enough, right? So I'm always trying to do more. I'm always trying to add more to that plate to be like, I'm doing enough. Whereas to sometimes I'm actually doing everything that I need to do and I don't need to anymore. So I think in my ideal actions of how I would show up in that situation is really asking myself the question is, do I really need to do more? Is there anything else that I need to do? Or am I really showing up as my true authentic self? And that's good enough. So. All right, guys, so we got a couple more minutes. I just want to give you guys a couple of extras that I know we didn't really dive into, but I think I just briefly touched on this. Like when you're identifying your inner critic, like what are the common denominators? So that could be like the triggers, or what are the things that are really coming up that are where this critic always comes up, right? Or this inner critic always shows up and starts asking me questions. Is it when I start something new? Is it when, you know, I've had a couple setbacks? Like when does this inner critic show up? I personally love to journal. So one of the things that I journal about outside of my letter to myself is kind of finding out again, when does that inner critic showing up? So like really practicing that mindful awareness, like when is it showing up? What are the triggers? And then I know this sounds very cheesy, but like writing down one thing that makes you awesome every day. Guys, you're super awesome. So making sure that you write that down every single day is important. And then acceptance. Just really understanding that inner critic is never going to go away, but really finding ways to combat that or to work within your inner critic to make yourself a better person. I also do like to breathe. So I do love myself some meditation and also yoga. And then my last good tip really is just humor. So when it all comes to a head, I like to be humorous about it. I like to think of this as my old lady that's coming at me and yelling at me with a cigar in her mouth. So I like to use humor. I like to laugh at myself. And I feel like that takes away a lot of that stress for me in becoming more of a perfectionist versus somebody that's just a human being. So guys, I do want to thank you. I know we have a couple more minutes, but I want to thank you guys for joining us today. I would love to stay in touch with you guys. So you guys can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Wellness After Dark. You guys can also follow me on LinkedIn, and that's just Tesha Crockett-Gibson. Or you guys can go to my website. I would love to answer questions. I'd also love to just stay in touch with everyone. I feel like as coaches, we have so much information to offer each other and so many different experiences that I just love kind of being in this community. So, but thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was an amazing workshop. So many great takeaways, and it's got me thinking about some of those inner critic voices. So thank you so much. This is phenomenal. Thank you everyone for being here. Make sure to reach out to her, stay connected, get connected with others in the workshop. And we hope to see you at the next one. We're taking a break from some of the workshops in July, but we'll restart them back up in August. So I hope to see you then. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
You too.